It's Warmachine Wednesday, and we didn't get much of an update from Steamforged today, so let's talk about the WTC. My name's Ryan, and I used to be good at Warmachine, used to go to the WTC. Welcome to Spell Rack. WTC lists were recently released, and now we have a lot more data to look at the faction level, at the caster level, and eventually, if you really want to dig into it, at the army level. Today, I want to look at the meta for the WTC at the faction and the caster level. Let's kind of see what we can learn there. One item I really want to think about is in past videos, I always review Longshank's data and win statistics. And sometimes people have commented on the videos that, like, yes, this faction may not be as good, but it more matters about the player. A really good player could play one of 3, 4, 5, 6 different factions and win an event. And that's absolutely true. It does matter about the player. But what also matters is what army that player selects. People that are going to the WTC are going to pick the faction that they think gives them the best chance to win. So in a way, the selection bias created in these lists shows you what the best armies and casters in the game are. So let's go ahead and look at the breakdown. If we go on to Longshanks, we have the list of rosters here, but if we go over here to the sort of data analyzer, it'll give us a breakdown of the armies. And so here we can easily see that Shadowflame Shard is the most popular army with 18 players. And not by a significant amount. 18 is only 2 higher than the next 3. What's really interesting, though, is who those next 3 are. Dusk at 16 is incredibly surprising to me. Dusk has been seen as a subpar faction recently, yet some of the best players in the world are choosing to play Dusk. And so the question of how good or bad is Dusk, it really comes into question here. These players are selecting into this faction. One other item that's worth differentiating really quickly is that this is a team event. If Dusk has really good matchups into everything except Infernals, then you can just try to dodge Infernals. And now Dusk is a much better faction. But anybody's going to have issues like that. But there's going to be a little bit of noise in the data here because people are going to pick factions based on team environments. We know there's a lot of Dusk players out there, so there's a lot of people with Dusk models. But with their lower win rate, I think it's really interesting to see them where they are. Not at all surprised to see Storm Legion and Gravediggers also at that 16 level. Specifically, Storm Legion has been a very strong faction for a very long time, has a couple of very good lists. And then Gravediggers, obviously newer, but have been definitely increasing in popularity and tournament success in the recent months. New kids on the block, Old Umbri, here at 15. Again, Umbree's probably the best faction in the game. Them being at 15, I would say, is not a consideration of them being the 5th best faction. I would say it's a matter of people getting a hold of models and being ready and practiced for this event. Old Umbri, though, I think clearly when we've looked at the statistics, is the best faction. Seeing Crix at 14, not a surprise. Crix has been very strong, although they have been dropping off a little bit, so that maybe that's why we see Crix below the Signars and the Gravediggers. Brinebloods also very good faction. And then once you get past Brinebloods, you get a pretty quick drop off, all the way down to 9 for Sea Raiders, because Orgoth has just not been that good. It's the faction of Horus, maybe Sabareth, and not a whole lot else. We have Infernals here at 8. Obviously, we know Infernals are a very good faction. They do have lower play rates than a lot of the other factions. So if you consider the play rates, 8 Infernals here feels like it's in line with everybody else. And so that might just be accessibility to the army and the models. Khador at 7, not surprised. Khador seems awfully terrible right now. And then we have Dark Operations at 6. Dark Operations, also sort of a newer born-again army. And then the rest of this is a little bit of noise. I'm not going to go over these in any amount of detail, but you can take an assessment of what's here on your own. So what I did was, this data is provided by Longshanks. If we come in here, I can actually click on players and I can click on lists. And inside of the lists, you can see who their casters are. So I have populated all of the Warcasters from the WTC, all 160 players. I went through it and I pulled out what casters are being played the most. This is another way to look at kind of this tier list where factions sit and where casters sit. The most popular Warcaster is Kythos. Kythos is the most popular because Kythos does get to double dip a little bit, playing in Necrofactorum and with Dark Operations. Kythos also an obviously very powerful Warcaster. Again, if we come back to the statistics, Crix is here at 14 plus 6 is 20. So 20 players have access to Kythos. It kind of makes sense that Kythos is the most played Warcaster. Sheerus, number 2 at 15, makes sense because Shadowflame is the most played faction. Sheerus is played by 15 of the 18 Shadowflame players. So Sheerus is seeing play. Well, I mean, Kythos is 16 out of 20. Sheerus is 15 out of 18. Those are tremendously high play rates for these casters. Clearly, these casters, very, very powerful. These are meta warping casters, especially Sheerus now with the Trike. The next is interesting that we see, Signar was in there at 16 players, and what we see here is their list pair. Huxley at 13 and Calder at 12. So this is by far, if you're going to play against Signar, you're going to see Huxley and Calder. 16 players, 13 of them played Huxley, 12 of them played Calder, and most of them are paired together. So very high play rates from these two Signar casters. Clearly, I mean, this is, again, when you're looking at players that are self-selecting their lists and the casters, this is almost as close as you get to kind of a tier list, I would say, in the game of, what are the best casters and the best lists in the game. Maxim here at 12. Obviously, there were a few less Umbri players, and Maxim very strong. One thing I will say as we go through this list is there are a number of options inside of Old Umbri. Maxim seeing 12 out of the 15 is still a very heavy percentage of the list. But Old Umbri does have some options. Next here we have Jakes is the front runner for Gravediggers. Vargas right there again with 11. You have 11 out of your 16 Gravedigger players. Here we actually have a little bit more variety, a little less concentration than what we've seen in some of these other factions. Kirax is your other pairing for Shadowflame. We have Helith and Moraine at 10 each. Again, lower concentration compared to what we've been seeing. Dusk had 16 players, and you have these two at 10. Ragemonger is your most popular troll caster. Trolls, though, only 13 players. And so you're seeing 9 out of 13 is a good percentage there. Eviscerus, a good second Crix caster. Horusk is obviously the anchor of Sea Raiders. You have 8 Horusk players out of 9 Sea Raiders players. So there's 1 Sea Raiders player that is not playing Horusk. McCoy is the other reason that we're seeing a little less concentration in the Jakes and Vargas meta inside of Gravediggers. Lots of McCoy players showing up. Here we have Reznikova, very, very powerful Old Umbri caster. Adaroth is in literally every pairing for Infernals. Kane 4 here at 7. Again, Kane 4 is one of those casters that gets to double dip. There's a few Canes in Gravediggers, and there's a few Canes in Signar, so it makes sense that he'd be a little bit more popular here. Shadowtongue, the second most popular caster for Shrine Bloods. Vilcool, our first Winter Core Warcaster showing up on the list. Obviously, Boomhowler for Brine Bloods. Here we have Infernals. What I thought was interesting was for the players that were playing Sea Raiders, for as powerful as I think Sabrath is, Orsis ended up tying Sabrath at the 5 and 5 spot. Not every single player played Horusk. So, somebody took this pair instead of Horusk. Further down the list for Dusk, we have Tyrus at only 5. I'll run through the rest of this list quickly after Tyrus. Siphon, Decathus, Foulblood, Hazaroth. Surprised to see 4 Hazaroth. Lycia. Lycia is interesting because she was one of the initial Old Umbri casters that seemed to be hot out of the gates, is very, very popular, high play rate. and then seems to have been replaced by Maxim. Not very many people taking Lycia here. Yana getting a little bit of play. Bodan only at 3. I'm not sure if I should be surprised by this or not. I don't know if that has to do with releases of boxes for Old Umbry, but I know Bodan seemed to be a favorite for a lot of Old Umbry players. But anyway, here's the way the list follows out. You guys can read it for yourself a little bit as I scroll through. Obviously, you have a handful of special snowflakes down here, the casters that are only represented once. Obviously, there's a certain player out of Australia that really favors Wolf. I do think it is really cool when players, really take on their special flavor of a character that they really support. That was me with Gorshade 2 back in the day, right? You probably could look at a data list like this, and I was probably the only idiot showing up with Gorshade 2, even though he was tremendously powerful for me. So just because some of these casters show up at the bottom here, don't overlook them. Anyway, I just wanted to give a breakdown, let everybody see what casters are being played. Everybody has easy access to the factions, but the casters not so much. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.